Set in a fictional hotel in the seaside town of Torquay on the English Riviera, Fawlty Towers ran from 1975 to 1979. But don't let that fool you into thinking it was 5 seasons. There were 2 series, both of 6 episodes each, one from 1975 and one from 1979. It's been on the long list of shows that have been targeted by today's cancel culture, and in 2020, the show was removed from all British streaming. And pretty much the only way you can watch it these days is with your own physical media copy. Though you can see some pretty terrible quality episodes on YouTube, except for the infamous The Germans. So welcome to Binge Drinking, and there's too much butter on those trays. Hey everybody, thank you for joining this Fawlty Towers edition of Binge Drinking here on Cinema Gulp. I'm Ben, joined by ScottyR37 of the Phantasmagorium Show, and the one and only Captain Finity from the Captain Finity YouTube channel. It's all
live from Torquay.
Yes, look at his background. Every time he's on camera, I'm just so stoked and jealous of this background.
You call that a view? I can't see the ocean.
I can see the sky, dude. It looks pretty nice.
What do you expect? Hordes of wildebeest crossing a gate across the Serengeti? This is Torquay, madam.
That would be pretty nice, actually, yeah.
Roll wildebeest.
We'll talk quickly about when the first time we saw this show was. I had heard of it growing up, but never had seen it. And my first girlfriend after my divorce, back in 2011, introduced me to the show and bought me this wonderful box set here. I remember us watching it. It took about two days to get through it, and it was her favorite thing in the world. She loved, even for 2011, some of the sensibilities were already sort of out of place for this show.
I saw it in the UK, probably not the first time round, but in the late 70s when I was still a fairly recent immigrant from Poland. So I was watching it as a kid thinking, so this is what English people are all like. This is what I need to be like. And that was correct.
It was an aspirational, because it was aspirational for me. I grew up watching it with my dad. He was a big fan of Python, and we watched Fawlty Towers. There are tendrils of other pop culture, and I'm like, I know that guy from The Empire Strikes Back, or I know that guy from Tomorrow Never Dies. And so I grew up with it, and it just became a thing. I loved Basil when I was a kid, and then rewatching it now, because this is probably the first time I've rewatched it since I watched it with my dad as a kid. I really sympathize with Manuel.
Yeah, Basil is the villain.
He is a bad man.
He's I compare it to Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm, where you're following this person and every decision they make is despicable and wrong, but they get their comeuppance in the end for the most part. So like John Cleese watching it probably as a kid, Scotty, was like, oh, he's so funny and it's so cool. Like he owns this hotel.
He's the most animated.
He's the biggest piece of shit ever, though. He's such a piece of shit, horrible human being. And I love him.
Doesn't like pain in the ass customers.
Yeah, he doesn't like pain in the ass customers, but there's moments where he finds out his wife is sick and feeling bad, and he's happy, he's celebrating.
Well, and like I have worked in customer service, and so every single one of Basil Fawlty's complaints that he has about his customers, I absolutely agree with. I don't think he's wrong. I think he is a twit, but like, it wouldn't be funny if I cared for him.
There's several reasons that I really relate to Waldorf Salad, that episode. Well, because you have the Southern California people that come there to visit. It's like the only time I think there's Americans on the show, and they're just pieces of shit.
They're just demanding, and see,
they're very demanding. Yeah,
but the Waldorf Salad, like, they're demanding. And I think that's the only time that anyone actually directly stood up to Basil.
Yes, you wouldn't prefer... Well, find out, will you? Just go out there and see if he knows how to fix me a Waldorf salad.
For the longest time, until I watched it today, I always thought the Waldorf Salad was the last episode. Because he leaves and then comes back to get a room. I thought that would have been the perfect end to the series.
I think there's I've heard a lot of rumors about changing of the order. There was rumors of a 13th episode that was actually filmed that never came out, because The Rat is not really a finale to anything, though they didn't know it was going to be a finale. But I always found like The Germans from season 1 was a little bit stronger of like, hey, we're going on hiatus until the next season, which was 4 years later. But
that must be when I called it 79.
Yeah, that's what you were saying, like late 70s. Yeah. I think the showrunners changed then, though. John Cleese and Connie
Booth.
Connie Booth were still writing it. Let's talk about the cast. Obviously, John Cleese is Basil. We talked about him. Prunella Scales is Sybil. She's fucking awesome. She's such a counterpoint, you know. I
find her strangely attractive.
Me too.
I am not surprised.
It's the hair. She's got bee nest hair, and then the next day it's like a mailbox, you know.
It doesn't. No. Prunella Scales had, and this is not a phrase I was expecting to say today. Prunella Scales has a tight body. She reminded me very much of a young Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah, there's lots of times where she has a Helena Bonham Carter. I love Dennis Wilson's theme song for this. It's perfect. It kind of meshes so much. I mean, it kind of embodies the show from the beginning of it. You know, it's still one of my favorite openings of a show since I saw it, where every episode, the writing of Fawlty Towers on the sign has changed. I think the last episode, it actually says flowery twat.
Yeah, and even the sign itself kind of looks like a finger pointing in Gilliam-esque silhouette. I don't know, there's something about it that it's a thought bubble.
Yeah,
it's really
a thought
cool.
bubble. Yeah, that's true. It is a thought bubble. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of British wit. I've always been I've never really enjoyed physical comedy. I'm not a slapstick fan, but it's interesting to see the farce of Fawlty Towers, it being both wit and slapstick, and it tickles me. It's still funny. I found myself guffawing quite a bit.
Yeah.
That man's attacking that mini.
It's definitely more high-strung than I remember, not just from the dialogue, but from the physical comedy. Moments where Basil just grabs Polly and yanks her around by her ear and just throws her up the stairs, like
just constant tension. Don't go there, not here. What? Sorry, Fawlty. Not. No, it's all right. Sorry, dear.
It's kind of like that comedy. I know this one wasn't like the creator of it. There's lots of them even back in the 50s and stuff where one lie stretches out and it just becomes more and more and more and more, and like it's harder and harder to get out. You know, Ben Stiller adopted that when he was writing his movies and being in his movies too. Like one lie kind of sets everything in motion, and you're just trying to dig your way out of that the whole time by telling more lies. And this show, like, you know, Basil is just that's him completely.
I find the difference to be that when Ben Stiller does it, all he has to do is man up and say it.
Yeah.
But when Basil is digging himself deeper and deeper and deeper, it's because he's such a narcissistic and neurotic man that he can't bear losing face in front of anyone else. He doesn't want to be proven wrong. If he's proven wrong, then he's disgraced, and that would be the worst thing in Basil's world. And we get to see that fatal flaw exploited by himself, and it's hilarious.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Like, all you have to do is tell the truth. Like the anniversary, it's, guys, thank you for coming. Yes, Sybil, I was planning on this being a surprise party, but all I should have said is, here's something. I should have given her one flower, and then she would have been like, well, that's not enough for my anniversary. But no, he had to construct this entire ridiculous scheme.
Well, when's the doctor coming?
Later. So
when?
Well, I don't know exactly.
Just so he could tell his friends that they were happily married still.
Yeah, and making Polly like dress up like her
for 100 pounds.
Yeah, it's the dumbest.
That was a lot of money back in those days.
Yeah,
it was going to get her a car. It was going to get her a car. I think The Builders is a good example of a service industry just not performing. Like, this happens to me fucking all the time. Like, people that are just supposed to do their job, when it comes to them servicing me, they fuck up, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's all industries. Look at you, Apple, stealing my videos.
Well, but being a person who has served other like servers, they'll say, you know, I am a waiter, or I am a waitress. I serve. And it's like, so aren't you supposed to be a little bit more forgiving? And that's when, like, I've been fired a lot from service industry. And because I emulated Basil Fawlty. Like, he is correct. Like, he's an asshole, but he's correct.
Oh, that on my gravestone.
I want a Waldorf salad and to follow a couple of filet mignons.
The way Fawlty Towers is, the way you can complain about your clients.
Oh, because you guys have customer service.
I wouldn't say so, man.
I've been fired a lot.
Pretty fucking dodgy over here, man. Like, especially nowadays, like the people serving you act like you're supposed to treat them good, you know, as opposed to the other way around. So, but my point was like Fawlty Towers, like it's that type of British humor that can only be done. That dialogue and those discussions and that observational humor is best served with British humor, not so much American humor. There's observational humor in America that's good, but it's just different.
Captain, maybe you can speak to this. Luckily, on the DVD, there's a bunch of special features and interview stuff with John Cleese, and he's talking about the differences between Python audiences and Fawlty Towers audiences. And he says that Fawlty Towers is a much more emotional comedy as opposed to an absurdist comedy. And what do you think about the manners of Fawlty Towers? You have an accent.
I have an accent. I thought you had an accent, sir.
That's fair enough. You got a good point there. I am from Barcelona.
Barcelona. And speaking the English.
I make a paella.
I mean, I guess in the UK, because this goes back to what you were saying, Ben, the social structure has changed. Times have changed. So there was much more of a rigid social structure in the UK back at the time. I mean, with hundreds of years behind it, your accent will mark you out more than your skin color, for example. I've noticed that Basil there's some kind of a level that he perceives himself at, because if he's annoyed by a customer, then but if he thinks someone's above him, it's like, ooh. So he's put himself mentally in a kind of hierarchy before anyone else puts him there.
Wow, that is perfect, because that's what the Psychiatrists is. That episode where the married psychiatrist couple, he's so out of his depth trying to talk to them, and he's so infuriated because he's just like, no, I hate psychiatrists, like they try to tell people what to do with their lives.
You know what they say it's all about, don't you? Sex. Everything's connected with sex. Oh, what a load of cobblers.
That's one of those rare episodes where he is wrong, like that funny little mix up with the sex and stuff, where they're asking him about holiday, but he thinks they're talking about how many times he fucks his wife. 2 or 3 times a week.
Common mishap.
How often do you manage it? How often can you and your wife manage it?
But that's such a strange episode. The Psychiatrist is such a strange episode because you get the 2 doctors, which is no, this doctor is my wife. Like, my wife is a doctor, which is, commenting on the sexism of the time, I guess.
Yeah, because Basil was like, he didn't even understand. He's like,
right. What do you mean 2 doctors? You're 2 doctors? Did you have to take the test twice? That has the gorilla man, like the Mediterranean man who is really good looking to Sybil, shows up, and then you get the hot Australian girl.
Yeah.
Then you get them going outside because Basil wants to find out whether or not the gorilla man has a lady in his room. Apparently it's against the rules. He's a non-sexual being. And one of the questions that I had was, how did Basil and Sybil get married? How did they meet? How did they court?
Yeah. You find a little bit about that on the anniversary, but they never follow through with anything. But
no,
I think the best
emotional
sexual
payoff.
gag is definitely in the Psychiatrists when he goes to turn the light switch on, and it's the Australian nipple. It's great.
The groping, I wasn't expecting the groping. I thought Basil was going to get electrocuted, but
yeah. You gotta love the rock star guy in the Jim Morrison shirt. That guy's just legend. I mean, and Sybil just totally wants to fuck him,
Yes.
from the get-go. Yeah. And I think that
with
has
a couple
something to
of
do.
buttons open. You'll think
Yeah,
this is sexist.
I don't even know if there are buttons.
Prunella Scales, the first question she asked the writer when she went into to the director or whoever, and it wasn't John Cleese, and said, how did these 2 ever get married? How did that happen? And they couldn't answer it, so she had to come up with it herself, and basically said that she was a barmaid in England, and he showed up and he was pretending to be posh. because he was just fronting, essentially. And she was taken by his auspices. And then eventually reality set in that he wasn't what she thought at first, but she always thought he could be.
That's a
So
good.
is that canon?
Well, it is. Prunella Scales said it.
What I always built that relationship up on, because they don't have kids. So I always thought they were business partners going into this hotel, and then just a business decision was like, let's get married. Because it's a joyless, sexist relationship. There's no kids. You could ask a million questions. How'd they get the fucking hotel? Why would they want to get the hotel? Was that something he aspired to do? Because he seems to fucking hate it.
She was surprised that two people could be like that with the idea that they were once in love. Has she never been divorced?
I like that because it was BBC Two, there was no set structure on how long episodes had to be. Like here in the States, they had to be like 27 minutes to add in for commercials. Obviously, that started dipping down later. Next thing you knew, shows were only 24 minutes and then 23 minutes. But each episode of Fawlty Towers varies from like 31 minutes to 35 minutes, which is great. And that's without commercials. But we have to get into the Germans. That one has been stricken from YouTube. Like, you can find most of the series on shitty quality on YouTube, except for that one.
Wow. You can't get the Germans.
Because there's some words in that one thrown around very casually.
Well, and racial slurs.
Racial slurs, yeah. Lots of, yeah.
The mockery of the German people is the tame part by today's standards.
100%.
Right.
And that stuff's the funniest part, too. Yeah, him talking to the four German people, and that shit is fucking great. Like, don't mention the war, and then he just can't get the word war out of his mouth. But it's when he's having a casual conversation with the general. It's the general, right?
Major.
I'm sorry, the major. And that guy,
Fawlty.
you were talking about people that you see from other things. He was in European Vacation with Chevy Chase. He's the one who, obviously Eric Idle's the one they hit riding the bike, but he was the one they hit his car and his bumper fell off.
Yeah, we should have run in a bit of trouble, what?
I'm really sorry. I'm just trying to get us back to our hotel.
An American.
Yeah,
Delighted to meet you.
Thank you.
And he's like, oh, take my bumper back to the States, a nice piece of Europe. And he's the one that delivers the infamous 5 or 6 N-words very casually in the show.
Oh, and variations. Like, not just one, multiple.
Yeah, multiple. It's hard to understand if that was not intended to be how it sounds at that point, because that was 75. That was the final episode of the first part of the series.
Yes.
So was that something in the UK in 75 that wasn't directly an awful thing to say to African Americans? Did it have other meanings? I don't know.
Wow, that's even the phrase. No, I think, this is really complex series. Race relations in the late 1970s.
Right.
There was racism, but the character making the racial slurs is a buffoon. So the show's in no way saying racial slurs are okay. So that's why it's a comment on censorship. If you can't have unsympathetic characters saying unsympathetic things, and that's where you get the censorship. So, but of course it wouldn't happen today because it's just too, I don't know, inflammatory.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, you can, back in the 80s, the villain of your movie could say something like that because it's getting across the point that they're the bad one, So
right.
Yeah, in context and stuff like that. But obviously in these days, it's just gone completely.
Well, and also, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it. As long as we're discussing race relations, why not go into the deep end? But if you're going to sit there and use racial slurs at the beginning of your episode that ends with a bunch of Germanic slurs based on an atrocity that had happened but 20 years earlier, that is, let's say the worst thing off the hop, and then by the time we get to the end, you're going to be fine with whatever we say about the Germans.
What you said there, Scotty, about the time, it got me. I think it's 30, but yeah, basically
30,
World War II ended 80
know,
years ago.
Yeah.
No, but it got me thinking. So World War II ended 80 years ago, and Fawlty Towers was 50 years ago. So as time goes on, it's just going to effectively be just after the war. So it's making me real. I mean, well, first I thought, fuck, I'm old. but also this is it's closer to World War II than now. So it's at the time there would have been people that had served on both sides that were watching the show. So I think, I mean, I never got an interview confirming this, but I think it was an attempt at some kind of healing through comedy, because we weren't enemies anymore, but it was still fresh in some people's memories. So, even for me, my generation growing up. So
yeah, and remember the Germans in it were just normal, nice people. And the final line after watching the buffoonery of the Fawlty Tower establishment, I think the final line is he says, "How did these people ever win?"
However did they win?
On that point, though, I'm still waiting to hear back from the BBC, because I thought the ultimate lesson is it's not about Germans. It's actually about Captain's subtext. He's trying not to bring something up. But I thought, why don't we do a more modern version? But instead, basically, I'm waiting to hear back from the BBC about relocating Fawlty Towers to Iraq and calling it Fallujah Towers, and instead having the Anglo-Americans come in, and it's Tony Blair and George Bush. That'd be funny, wouldn't it? Don't mention the war. You started it. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. You invaded Baghdad on the false pretext of non-existent weapons of mass destruction. Still waiting to hear back from the BBC.
If someone had balls, that could be the biggest show ever, because everyone
Fallujah Towers.
Cultural significance of Fawlty Towers. I remember watching a Whoopi Goldberg movie in the 80s called Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Hells yeah.
And there's a scene where she's on the phone talking to like a poodle groomer, and she's British, and she's doing a British accent. And she goes, "My name, dear? You want my name? Sybil Fawlty." And I didn't understand what that meant as a kid. And then when I watched Fawlty Towers and I realized the name of the character, I immediately went back to, I go, "Oh, that's from Jumpin' Jack Flash." She was using that. That made sense to somebody in 1987 when that movie came out. That was a joke. I didn't get it at the time, but it was a Fawlty Towers joke.
I found it very interesting that the last line spoken in the series by Prunella Scales is, "Oh, it looks like it's rain again."
She's not wrong.
Waldorf salad. When I love it. Again, there's so much funny like Southern California isms in there when Sybil's talking to them and she's like, "Oh, Basil, we should go to Southern California. You could swim during the day and drive up to the mountains and go skiing." He goes, "That sounds exhausting."
You Californians in your sunshine. What's wrong with a bit of doom and gloom and blah? Grey clouds. I can't get the words out.
Cheers, guys. Cheers. Coffee, good. Do you guys have any favorite episodes? I think personally the Psychiatrists might be my favorite episode.
Germans is an obvious one.
Yeah, that's true.
But also the Inspector, because I realised even with Fawlty Towers, like with Tom and Jerry, my empathy chip wasn't quite switched off, and I did start feeling bad for the situations. But the health inspector was played by they're all played by English actors pretty much, but Bernard Cribbins, who I knew from a kid show that I was watching because I was a kid. So that kind of broke the spell, but in a good way, because then I could enjoy the comedy knowing that they're all so in a weird way. The verisimilitude was lost, but I enjoyed the comedy more because I didn't have to wince so much about all the embarrassing things that Basil was doing.
Dude, you're good call. The Inspector was great. That's the one where he literally chokes out one of the hotel guests at the dinner table.
The American in the Waldorf salad also played General Reichian in The Empire Strikes Back. And I'm
going to have to look at that now. Yeah.
And that is good enough for me.
You're a good fighter, Solo. I hate to lose you.
The voice, Scotty, only the voice. Yeah, that's it. You're a good fighter, Solo. We hate to lose you. I can now, and this salad's not right already. Yes.
Wow.
Walnuts, grapes, apples, celery. In mayonnaise.
There was talk in the early 90s that they were going to do a series, like a revival series, where the Fawltys were retired and visiting Manuel in Barcelona. That probably would have sucked, because without the domain, without their their setting, I don't know what that would be like. I mean, it wouldn't have. It probably would have still been funny.
They do. John Cleese mentions what the possibility for the revival would have been, again, on the disc. And he says that it would have been finally going to meet Manuel's family, and then they would be held up in the airport, and then the plane would be hijacked.
Yeah, there's talk of a revival now, and it's like, why? Like, you can't even. What are you going to even say? Like, it's so different.
Yeah, that's very topical. Yeah. There's a rumor going around. There's going to be a new series. Correct?
Yeah. Were they just going to apologize for the other series for an entire season?
John Cleese is 83 years old. And I don't necessarily want him to revisit this particular pasture.
Yeah, Connie Booth and him got divorced like right after, I think, the second, like in the 80s or early 80s or something. So even like another talk of like any other thing, she obviously wouldn't be involved, so.
She's a psychotherapist now.
I think she's 80. By the way, I had a huge crush on her when I first saw this show because blonde, like Brits, oh god, they're so great.
I'm with you.
It was a super hardcore roller coaster the last 3 days, like rewatching this on these DVDs, just forgetting a lot of stuff and kind of taking it a completely different lens than I did 12 years ago when I first saw it. This was a fun one, very easy on the binge scale level, like super bingeable, especially if you got like a couple of people over and you're having some beers and making some food. It's fucking great for binging. Yeah, and there's no continuity level. There's no kind of serialness to it. It's just sort of like every episode is its own thing, like sitcoms used to be back in the day. I say I give it an A just for entertainment value. Made me laugh still. John Cleese is a legend. He's a genius. What about you, Cap?
Yeah, I'm going to straight away go with an A. Because you were mentioning earlier about how many people know about it. It used to be in the UK that it was almost compulsory viewing. Everyone knew Fawlty Towers. Now, I've not been in the UK for a decade and a half, so I don't know if that's generationally true, but it was like a standard part of your growing up to watch Fawlty Towers. So it's a major cultural milestone for Britain and the UK. Hence the A. Yep, I like it. The only reason it doesn't get an A plus is my standard thing. I don't like laughter in comedies, whether it's canned or a live studio audience. The best comedies and movies have no laughter, but that's just a little quibble. That was all sitcoms back in those days. So
I adore this comedy, not just because I grew up with it, but also it is alien to me. I grew up with North American comedy. And in North American comedy, the protagonist in any comedy is usually a Bugs Bunny, get out of jail free, smug Fletch-like character. That is the person that you root for. That's American comedy. You watch a British comedy and the protagonist, or the main character, I suppose protagonist, is usually a Daffy Duck. It is someone of derision. And that's what makes it funny. You can laugh at the person that you're watching because they are silly and you are better. But in American comedy, you're watching someone that you aspire to be because they can get out of anything. In British comedy, you're looking at the person who is the clown, who is doing everything wrong because you know how to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's incredible. It's incredible to watch. And so I started off this conversation by saying I identify with Manuel is because Manuel does not know what's going on.
Nope.
Trying his best. He is trying so hard. And every time he tries hard, it doesn't work. And he gets hit in the head by a bad person. Like, it almost turns stooge. And
the moose head.
Exactly. Fawlty Towers is a fail video of someone screaming at everything that they cannot change. And it's amazing to laugh at someone who will hold their own appearance higher than social niceties.
And without so much of the physical comedy level, you have things like Seinfeld and, well, even, I mean, especially the 2 seasons of The British Office, where you have that similar thing where it's the buffoonery and the lies are what drive the comedy and get people in more and more trouble and try to dig themselves out. And a fun fact, though, it was Ricky Gervais, when asked about why he stopped The Office so quickly, he said, "I don't want to go any longer than Fawlty Towers did." And I was like, okay.
Like, as a gateway for other British comedies, where do you think, like, this has influenced many? I would say that just in terms of wit, in terms of writing, I look to Black Books with Dylan Moran as being obviously a spiritual successor to Fawlty Towers.
Interesting. He's a bit of a Bugs and a Daffy because he's incredibly rude, but he's somehow more sympathetic. Or maybe that's just the way Dylan Moran plays him.
Basil Fawlty doesn't get pity. Bernard Black does.
Yeah, he's more sympathetic. Yeah.
There's no moment with Basil where he contemplates what he's doing and thinking anything is wrong. There's no silent moment. There's no camera zoom in. He's just...
Actually, that's what they said about the creators of Seinfeld. Is that guy? Oh yeah, Seinfeld and co. Is they literally said no hugging, no learning. So maybe they were partly inspired by Fawlty Towers with that.
100%. Thanks, guys. As always, great conversation. I'm glad we got to binge drink Fawlty Towers. Everybody, please find ScottyR37 on the Phantasmagorium Show. What do you have coming up?
We are going to be talking about Heart of Ice and Sub-Zero, the Batman animated Mr. Freeze episodes. That's what's coming up. And also, Anti-Derivative Jill and myself are going to be reviewing Star Trek Picard Season 3.
No!
And Captain Finity, just growing and growing. Smart channel, hilarious channel, entertaining channel. What do you have going on? I mean, you're streaming all the time, but do you have anything specific coming up, or just keep watching?
Well, there is a question about this character Rick Deckard and whether he's a replicant. I feel that we haven't talked about that enough. And then
I heard he was a human.
Yeah, there's a theory going around.
I think you guys should start talking about Back to the Future, personally, but, you know.
Yeah, well, this whole month I'm into canon. But broadly the channel, within the context of jokes and laughter, we like to not only study films and comics, but the tropes and the writing tricks and tips to create those stories. So we like to look at canon, for example.
And also, would you happen to have some sort of sequential art coming out?
Oh, yes, the good point. I've got a comic book coming out sometime this decade called Captain Finity. So that's, hopefully available this year. Watch this space. Thanks, Scotty. I almost forgot my first main project.
For Cinema Gulp, a milestone is a milestone. We're approaching 550. We'd love to get there by the end of February with some luck and people sharing this video and sharing other videos, because 550 is 550. And for us, we'll take it. So thank you, Scotty. Thank you, Cap. Love you guys. This was a blast. We'll do more binge drinking. Till next time, everyone, I'm Ben for Cinema Gulp. We drink your cinema.
See, I reckon you're about an 8 or a 9. Maybe even 9.5 in 4 beers time.
I'm not trying to pull you, even though I would like to.